Hi, my name is Lily, and today I'd like to do a video mainly inspired by a book I read by Robert A. Johnson called Transformation: Understanding the Three Levels of Masculine Consciousness. When I say masculine consciousness, it's not just about men. Everyone has masculine and feminine energy within each of us. Most people identify with one particular energy more than the other, but they both exist within each individual. Sometimes we try to deny those opposite aspects of ourselves, but they're in there, and if you try to suppress that aspect of yourself, then it comes up unconsciously anyway in human behavior. Feminine energy has more to do with the realm of intuition, sensing, and emotions, while the masculine energy is more logical thinking and analytical. Both are important for everyone to develop as a person. These energies are not balanced within us, then it creates issues. Too much masculine energy within a person or a society without the feminine side can create an environment where you're dismissing emotions for the realm of logic. And we do live in a world of duality, and so logic does not entirely reign supreme every time. A healthy balance is needed for ascension of the collective and for a more balanced society. And over-attaching to the intellectual side of things actually ends up making you delusional, as you are dismissing a big part of the human experience, which is the realm of emotions. It's important to respect the feminine energy and not dominate it in an overpowering way. An unbalanced masculine energy is typically very focused on material things, and they can be aggressive, cold, distant, critical, judgmental, selfish, and defensive. You see this a lot in toxic masculinity teachings that have been passed down generations, and then some people embrace this and teach it on the internet as well still. Sometimes that whole alpha male stuff can get involved in things like that. Some of the alpha male teachings can be okay, but a lot of it, if they're embracing that toxic masculinity, they're kind of veering too far off into that side of things, and it's not great. An unbalanced feminine energy within a person can create someone who constantly seeks external validation, is insecure, manipulative, stuck in cycles of feeling like a victim, sacrificing herself, desperate for love, and has problems with boundaries. This energy can get stuck in delusions and lacking that connection with the physical world. These energies are not specific to gender. Men can have more feminine energy and women can have more masculine energy. So you can have a man that is acting in his wounded feminine energy, and you can have a woman acting, so you can have a man acting like a victim, etc. Sometimes if you're connecting with a wounded masculine or feminine energy, you begin to mirror the other energy's wounded characteristics because their behavior is triggering you and you're mirroring those types of behaviors. If you maintain a balanced and healed version of the dominant energy you identify with, then you won't even be attracted to that energy because you can recognize it's not in alignment with the balanced energy that you embody. It's important to disconnect from that energy if you're dealing with that to maintain and regain equilibrium. If not, then they will continue to pull you down to their level since their energy is literally heavier. I'll give an example with a heterosexual couple. Let's say you are a female who embraces your feminine energy, and the guy you're with or dating or trying to talk to is acting more like a wounded feminine. Then it could cause you to go into a wounded masculine energy as a response to his energy he's putting out towards you. And this can go either way. It's not just the gender, This is another sign that you're not in alignment with each other. If you're trying to be in your feminine energy and the guy you're with is the one being in his feminine energy and making you kind of switch to that masculine energy, then there's just like a disconnect there. if that's the type of dynamic you want in a heterosexual couple, because, sometimes it's opposite. And, in those couples, the woman has more masculine energy. So whichever one you're trying to be, if they're influencing you to go to the opposite, then that's a sign that you're not in alignment in that connection. So this can manifest in, like, let's say the guy starts acting like a victim in things or being manipulative, and then that's the wounded feminine energy. So then it causes you to become distant, cold, or defensive. So he's acting like a victim in something, and then you're like, okay, well, that's weird, And so you could either get defensive, or you could pull back and be like, okay, well, you're in your feels, so, But it definitely can go either way. When in the presence of a balanced masculine energy is when the balanced feminine energy can come out. When feminine energy is feeling unsafe, then they cannot embrace that energy. It has to resort to the masculine energy, which is the protective or the defensive energy. It's similar, it's the same concept as, like, if a woman is, like, out walking alone somewhere, she always has to be on the defense of things. She has to be aware of her surroundings. Like, she can't really comfortably be in her feminine energy out in the world like that, because she's always, like, having to be aware. Now, if she's with a masculine energy she can trust, whether that's, friend, family member, partner, whatever, then she can embrace that energy more freely, because she doesn't have to look out. She can, leave that up to the masculine energy. And once again, this is not specific to gender. So examples of different levels of consciousness are like people compared to dogs. Dogs are operating at a lower level of consciousness compared to people, as they rely more off of their instinct and they're not thinking too much about the future or the past consciously. Their behavior is more operating from that unconscious realm. Children generally are also operating at a lower level of consciousness, and then they expand more as they grow up, some quicker than others. And age is not directly correlated with higher levels of consciousness. You can have younger people operating at higher levels than older people. Definitely depends, that's the kind of, like, old soul type of energy. It translates to having a lot of reincarnations on Earth. So you have more experience with the planet, the energies, and so you've learned some more lessons, more than people that are, like, haven't been here as long, and so they don't get stuff the same. I read a book a few years ago for my anthropology class, and it was called Song of the Ape: Understanding the Language of Chimpanzees by Andrew Halloran, where he was a zookeeper and he became fascinated by the chimpanzees' communication system where he was working. The chimps had their own island where they lived, and one day Andrew forgot to secure the rowboat on the mainland, and he looked up and saw it floating away to the chimps' island. And in an orchestrated fashion, the 5 members of the chimp group came together all around Chimp Island quietly. They boarded the rowboat. They sat in 2 rows of 2 with the alpha male chimp in the back of the boat, propelling it forward and steering. This occurred without screams or disorder and seemed to be pre-planned and communicated. Through this observation and more studying of the chimps, he learned that they have very complex set of vocalizations to communicate with each other that's similar to human language. This demonstrates the advanced consciousness of chimps compared to other animals and how they're actually really smart. They just don't want to pay taxes, so they, like, dumb themselves down. But they're coming. Chimp war. The other book I'm discussing today follows 3 stories or characters to explain the different levels of consciousness for the masculine energy. The 3 levels of consciousness that are available to us are simple consciousness, which is a 2-dimensional man, which is not often seen in our modern technological world. Then there's complex consciousness, which is a three-dimensional man, which is the usual state of an educated Western person. And then the enlightened state of consciousness, which is the fourth-dimensional man, which is known only to a few individuals. The enlightened state is the culmination of human evolution and can be attained by only highly motivated people after much work and training. An example from the book is that a simple man comes home in the evening wondering what's for dinner. The complex man comes home pondering the imponderables of fate. And the enlightened man comes home wondering what's for dinner. Simple man and enlightened man have much in common, including a direct, uncomplicated view of life, and so they react in similar ways. The only true difference between them is that the enlightened man is conscious of his condition, while the simple man is not. Complex man, on the other hand, spends much of his time worrying and is often in a state of anxiety. That is the majority of the people here. So, in this book, he uses different characters from literary works to describe these levels of consciousness. The first character representing the simple consciousness is called Don Quixote by Cervantes. If I pronounced that wrong, blame Google. But that was first published in 1605, which is basically the story of a man that is so enamored by the simple ways of the medieval man that he took on the finery of knighthood and chivalry. This consciousness level was more common in the past, literally medieval times, as learning materials were not as abundant and easy to access as they were before. The second character representing the complex consciousness is the character of Hamlet from the Shakespeare play, which was first published in 1603. The third character represents the enlightened consciousness, which is Faust by Goethe. Once again, if I pronounce that wrong, blame Google. First published in 1808, which picks up where Hamlet lost the battle and takes us to the higher consciousness, often called redemption. A quote from Johnson in his book about simple consciousness, which is the first one, says, "We often project this quality onto dark-skinned minorities and women and then resent them for it." So this is a stereotype that women and people of color are somehow intellectually inferior due to those physical characteristics. What's interesting is this book was published in 1991, which is 33 years ago. Some quick math for you. And this discrimination is still very much alive and well in our society. Perhaps like socially, legally, professionally, it's taboo to have those feelings, openly at least, but oftentimes the prejudice still exists in the subconscious behaviors of a lot of people around the world. So it's interesting how, progress is slow and that type of thing. People who live in more rural places in the United States typically hold these beliefs more openly as they're stuck in the past and not evolving. This is toxic masculinity and outdated belief systems. The belief that one is intellectually superior due to these physical characteristics. This pattern indicates that they're operating at a lower level of consciousness. They cannot handle being perceived as equals to these minorities. So this is projection. They feel threatened by the idea of equality, so they need to put them down to keep this illusion of control in their own mind. And it is an illusion. It's not real. So in fourth dimensional consciousness, which is Faust, you operate from the heart chakra and the frequency of love. So you cannot be that level of consciousness and be racist and sexist. So in the progression and spiritual evolution of a species, eliminating that superiority bias is part of the process of ascension. So, there are people who suck in all races, ethnicities, genders, and there's no need to discriminate against an entire group of people just because of personal experience. Your personal experience isn't a representation of the whole group. I find that to be common sense, but I know it's been made abundantly clear that is not as common as it should be, and that's crazy. So, on to the stories. So, Don Quixote is the first character we'll discuss in the book that represents the simple consciousness. He is rich in his imagination at the expense of outer fact and reality. He is Delulu. We love that for him. He is free, optimistic, happy, unself-conscious, and sure of himself. These are chief characteristics of a two-dimensional man. This story and the last story with Faust both contain characters that have an archetypal pair of opposites in the stories. So Don Quixote is tall, noble of bearing, like he's got good posture, that's what that means, and idealistic, while Sancho Panza, which is his like buddy he travels with, his friend, whatever, is short, fat, practical, immediate, and ruled largely by his appetite. This type of archetypal duo shows up in many stories, such as Cain and Abel from the Bible. It is the ego and the shadow. The pair of opposites in every psyche that differ in every way but are inseparable. Don Quixote and Sancho Panza set forth to find Dulcinea, once again, pronounced wrong, blame Google, Dulcinea, which is the sweetness of life. Don Quixote, Mr. Don, maybe I'll call him Mr. Don. Mr. Don admits, I don't like that. Don DQ, Mr. DQ, I don't know, bro, DQ. Mr. Don Quixote admits he is not sure if Dulcinea even exists, but he vows to give his life for her. They never find Dulcinea, but she animates their journey from beginning to end. She exists in the heart of the searcher, which is all that matters to a two-dimensional man. He never tests this inner vision against outer reality. When one begins such testing, the two-dimensional quality is irretrievably lost. He wants to stay Delulu. So an example, there's a part in the story where they both approach a field of large windmills. He calls them lawless giants and how he will deprive them out of their lives. It is a great service to remove so accursed a breed from the face of the earth. Sancho Panza's like, what giants? Delulu. He tries to convince Don Quixote that they are not giants to battle, but he is the one who thinks Sancho is delusional. He says, "It is plain to see you have little experience in this matter of adventures. If you are afraid, go off to one side and say your prayers while I am engaging them in fierce, unequal combat." Even after approaching the windmills to attack, he does not realize that they were not enemies to be defeated. His final epiphany of the situation was that the magician Freston must have changed these giants into windmills in order to deprive him of the glory of defeating them. This is a good idea, a good picture, maybe slightly exaggerated for the delusions of simple consciousness. Some adults operating at this level will not truly fall for this, and hopefully they'll be able to tell that they're windmills. But some may, a child is more likely to do this, Their child are always living in their imagination, and, they're more likely to, think things like that and be in situations like that. This is also a good example for seeing the relationship between the conscious and unconscious here, between Don and Sancho. The unconscious tries to tell you things so it can break through your conscious, but stubbornness will keep them apart until the message is ready to be received. So the two-dimensional man constantly lives in the realm of fantasy and imagination. They are the Garden of Eden perfection. They fail Don Quixote constantly of the outer world, and if you examine the story of the third-dimensional consciousness, it's a lesson in futility and childishness. He is unbeatable because he only seeks reality on an inner level. These people think that they are right in matters and often refuse to listen to other perspectives as they are so sure of themselves when it's obvious to others they are not fully in touch with reality. This, once again, is the consciousness of children, typically lost in their imagination. It's real to them, but not to the adults. We're going to veer off the story a little bit. Reality in a whole is just illusions, right? So the illusions of our society, our world, our government, our programming. We're here to recognize these illusions, which leads to self-realizations. The illusion of separation. All perspectives exist at once. Everything and everyone is connected. There's the illusion of choice, the illusion of materialism, the illusion of the body and the mind, the illusion of the ego and the subconscious programming. Fear and shame is also an illusion, and people like to cling to those negative feelings to make us feel safe in the moment, but it can actually be destructive, you know? Like if you're afraid of something, and you use that fear to protect you, and you're like, well, I'm going to avoid situations because I'm afraid and I'm going to, avoid it. Well, that's actually destructive in a way. You're not facing your fears and you're keeping that energy within you, holding on to that fear, and that is destructive. So that is an illusion. Fear is an illusion. It's not real. Trauma can keep us stuck in those illusions. The illusion that everything is okay when really you self-sabotage yourself all the time, which you create this illusion of control. Time is an illusion to us, as everything exists at once. There are things, people, jobs, mindsets we attach to that become our reality, but they too are just an illusion. And once you recognize that, you become happier and experience more inner joy, as you're not so attached to these physical things. Right? That's that whole attachment is the root of suffering. Yeah. Take away the illusions and all that's left is love. Illusions keep you connected to the lower realms of consciousness. Yeah, that's the thing. In the beginning, if you want to, you can find correlations to a lot of different religions and what they say in their little books and stuff. But, one of them was in the beginning there was light, and then there was I don't know, other stuff. But in the beginning there was a consciousness or light or love. And then in order for us to have these experiences on earth, there had to be distortions. There had to be the darkness. Otherwise everything would just be light. And so the darkness is an illusion. And so that is part of it, is finding the way back to the light. And that kind of goes with the theory that our universe is expanding, and then at some point it'll stop expanding and then retract again and then start back to nothing, or go back in itself or whatever. And then it starts all over, and it's just a cycle that keeps happening. I can't prove that that's what's going to happen or what's going on, but that's just something that's a pattern I found that correlated with science and spirituality, and how there's overlap in a lot of concepts like that. Back to the story. Upon the ending of the story, the pair return home. Don Quixote is dying from his adventures. He had too much fun fighting them windmills. Upon his deathbed, he now realizes all of his adventures have been unrealistic exercises in his imagination. Sancho, however, begins to reverse his role that he's been playing this whole time, and now he tries to argue that they should set forth and try to find Dulcinea again. And then in the end, Don dies, and the last hours of his life he spent in third-dimensional consciousness. We see this pattern in all of our characters. It is a common phenomenon in real life where people have major realizations at the end of their life as they're dying, either slowly in a nursing home or hospice or whatever, or quickly. You have all kinds of realizations, and the state of your consciousness at the end of your life determines how you will be reincarnated in the next life. Now we focus on the complex consciousness man who remains stranded in his worry, loneliness, and anxiety. Happiness is only known to the simple man and the enlightened man. Complex man is between these consciousness levels and remains trapped by nostalgia of the past and anticipation for the future that mostly eludes his grasp. This is a three-dimensional consciousness where Don Quixote left off. The character to correlate with this is Hamlet, who is a man of tragedy who makes chaos and failure of everything he touches. Hamlet is a torn man and a suffering man. He has valuable insight to the emptiness and loneliness of modern existential life. Most people are operating at this level of consciousness, trying to cling to the past versions of themselves that were once so delusional, but plagued with anxious thoughts and worries of the current state of the world. They're seeking the enlightened state, but unsure exactly how to get there. He has no roots in the instinctive world, and his head is not yet in the heavens, where he can gain the nourishment of enlightenment. He is the forerunner of a new man whose characteristics will be the healing of the paradox of the masculine and feminine energies by doing and being. I'm going to do a quote from a Chinese sage. I think his name is pronounced Lao Tzu. If not, once again, blame Google. He commented on this phenomenon. He says, "He who understands the masculine and keeps to the feminine shall become the whole world's channel. Eternal virtue shall not depart from him, and he shall return to the state of an infant." Hamlet's failure in the story is that while he touches the divine state, he makes only division with himself, not unity. If Hamlet has a falling, it is his inability to withstand the pressure of the herd mentality that surrounds him. He cannot make up his mind to whether follow the dictates of custom and its barbaric solutions or listen to the enlightenment of his own soul and conscience. He does neither, finally losing the value of them both. So, to the story of Hamlet. If you don't know Hamlet, or forgot it, because I definitely read it back years ago but forgot it, I'll give you a refresher. So Hamlet was upset because his father died, and then a month after his father died, his mother went and married his uncle, which caused him to lose the throne. Which, he was the rightful king of the land, and now he wasn't because uncle took it over. His father, then a ghost, haunts the castle and says he was murdered and that Hamlet must take revenge and take his place as king. He is then plagued with indecision. Do I kill my father, or do I listen to the noble part of my heart and not make it any worse? Ultimately, he chooses neither. He stays in this state of indecision and inaction, and this becomes his undoing. And this is the current state of the complex man. He utters the famous line of "to be or not to be," that is the question in which he's debating offing himself in this predicament. This is the cry of despair and imprisonment that haunts every three-dimensional man. He tortures everyone around him, especially the women close to him, and makes life unbearable for himself. A lesser man might have burst his way out of the dilemma by killing his uncle. A greater man might have withdrawn from the struggle and found a solution through faith and fate. This is not to imply that killing the uncle would be wrong. Hamlet's indecision is the problem in the story here. Hamlet, when challenged about what he is doing, replies, "Words, words, words." Three-dimensional men are often caught in words and hesitant to act. It is characteristic of the complex man caught between functioning by instinct and acting by enlightenment, that he often destroys everything feminine within his grasp. We watch as Hamlet destroys Ophelia, who was a potential wife for him, for what woman could withstand such abuse, or what feminine element. We see Hamlet destroy the queen, his mother, with equal devastation. All feminine elements wither in the face of three-dimensional consciousness. We'll get to what happens with them. Hamlet finally decides, okay, he'll kill the king, but then he faces indecision again about it. It's like, I don't know. Ophelia could not take it anymore. She decides to drown herself in the stream. The king learns of Hamlet's plan to kill him, and Laertes, who is Ophelia's brother and Hamlet's friend, he instructs him to challenge Hamlet to a duel, but secretly put poison on his sword so he can stab him. A cup of poisoned wine is placed nearby in case that plan does not work. So Hamlet is wounded in the battle, and through the struggle, they end up switching swords. And now Hamlet wounds Laertes, and now Laertes is facing death. He confesses what he has done, and now Hamlet takes action and strikes the king with the poisoned sword. But it's too late. During this time, no one noticed the queen, and she took a sip of the poisoned wine. And I personally think that is funny that through all of this, she's like, I need a drink. I don't blame her. But yeah, so now Hamlet, the queen, the king, Laertes, and Ophelia all died, and made this situation much worse because he could not decide. You know, if he would have decided, okay, I'm just going to kill the king, he would have just killed the king. If he would have decided, I'm not going to kill the king, then no one would have died, probably, you know? So Hamlet comes to the realization of how his inaction and indecision caused all of this. He's wise enough to see, but not strong enough to accomplish. He was stuck between vision and practicality and failed in both regards. This is the prototype of many modern men who see a noble world in their imaginations, but don't have the means to accomplish it. Parents can push their children out of their simple consciousness very young because they think that complex consciousness is superior. You know, like reading, writing, computer skills, they value that over imagination. But this often produces children who have been robbed of their childhood and end up developing mental health problems such as anxiety, depression, and OCD. They can push children too hard to get good grades or even try to maintain a state of perfection, especially in regards to education. This pressure from parents can continue through to college. Medieval Catholicism has been accused of trying to keep its people in a peasant state, only allowing education to people destined for sainthood and priesthood. Galileo was censored for sharing information that challenged the church's views, threatening their control of people in simple consciousness. You can also see this attempt at distractions in the modern world, as we have an abundance of distractions at our fingertips. Social media apps are designed to keep us doom scrolling forever, and this is an attempt of keeping us in the simple-minded consciousness. College education being very expensive is also an attempt to keep people in a lower consciousness mindset. Not that it's necessary to go to college to expand your consciousness, but it helps sometimes. Half the time. Sometimes it doesn't work at all. I don't know. Especially nowadays, like, college prioritizes getting good grades. Not even college, it's just the culture. Like, getting good grades is not the same as learning the material. And so that's why, like, some people go to college, get a degree, and they're dumb still. Because they know how to, like, knowing how to get good grades and be successful in school is not the same thing as learning. The immense popularity of drinking alcohol regularly, despite its harmful effects, is also something used to keep us distracted. You know, how, like, it's such a thing that, like, celebration, go out for drinks. After work, go out for drinks. Weekend comes, you go out for drinks. You go to the club, drinking, you know, and it's, like, kind of surprising how damaging it is and how prevalent addiction is. And it's kind of socially acceptable. You know, we have so many liquor stores, 24-hour liquor stores, and it's entirely very damaging. So, I mean, that's also something that's keeping us, you know, killing our brain cells. Substances can help you cope with life, but too much of anything can cause you to become dependent and take you to a dark place where you can't escape, which happens to a lot of people. The desire to suppress your feelings with substances is a message that things need to be addressed, and if they aren't, then these negative cycles and patterns will continue, and you'll keep repeating the same mistakes, sinking deeper into despair and harming your body permanently. Substances can help the process of inner work not be as intense, because some people really struggle with being sober for any periods of time. You know, some people aren't used to it, and if you're suppressing major trauma and then you stop using whatever substances, like weed's a big thing that people use for anxiety, depression, and it's getting more legalized. You know, they use it for all kinds of medical thingies. And if you stop the substances, for some people, it can lead to major dysfunction in which your life falls apart, whether it's your job or your relationships. So for some people, it is better to continue using substances, but also trying to work through the trauma. And it can help, doing a little bit at a time. But when you're just using substances constantly to like numb the pain, then, you're just suppressing things. So I do recognize some people can't just quit cold turkey. So there should be an attempt of gradual progress of improvement instead of just continuing to suppress the darkness. Okay, now we focus on Faust, or the story of the four-dimensional man. Hamlet's error in his story was that he failed to incorporate his shadow into his working life. He stayed tied between his ego and his shadow. Faust picks up where Hamlet leaves off. He finds a way out of paralysis by interacting with his shadow, who has also a name in this story. Mephistopheles is his shadow, and then Faust is the ego. And in this story, they both have to temper each other until they find redemption. So in the story with Faust, he is a middle-aged college professor, and he is at the highest position possible for him, but in his life, he is feeling meaningless. He is just becoming wise enough to know that he knows nothing. He knew this time would come to this point of hopelessness in his life. He reaches for the vial of poison that he keeps in the back of his desk drawer. And this is a terrible moment in the life of an intelligent man. He now sees that his level of consciousness will not support him. The more intelligent the man, the more profound the suffering. There is no longer joy in activities he used to enjoy. He has explored self-consciousness and discipline only to find them to be a dead end. This exploration is absolutely essential to one's evolution, and the man who has not trodden that road is not eligible for the moment of despair. That is also the moment of redemption and enlightenment. This is the midlife crisis, the dark night of the soul. This is the experience of the intelligent man who has reached the goal of modern consciousness. It is the very best men who suffer this Hamlet crisis. Lesser men take refuge in guilt at their inadequacy or blame their environment. Anything except face the terror that three-dimensional consciousness is not bearable. If one were a genius, this process would be inspirational, but for most of us, it is experience as the torture at the end of the rope. Hamlet fails at this moment. Faust finds a correct way. Just as Faust is about to drink the poison, he hears Easter music. A heavenly choir appears and so inspires him that he forgets the poison and rises to a new understanding and consciousness. The Easter music Faust hears is available to any person, but it generally takes a great crisis before the ego of an ordinary Western man is humble enough to hear the infinite music. Faust sets the poison aside and goes to mingle with the festival crowd outside his study. He dances with a peasant girl, accepts a stein of beer, and draws close to the ordinary world, which only moments before had seemed so alien to him. For a man who has been locked up in his Hamlet isolation for half a lifetime, the experience of human warmth and closeness is a reprieve from hell. This is a touch of the beginning of the fourth dimensional consciousness to show the possibility exists of improvement. This kind of reminds me of like psychedelics and how they can bring you a profound experience of connectedness and show you there is this potential of spiritual enlightenment. But once it wears off, you're back to normal. And hopefully you've had a few epiphanies and some perspective shifts. But using drugs like that can come at a cost, like depleting your dopamine. But that's what a lot of them, are for, is to show you this possible other world. So if you can wait just a little longer when you reach the terrible moment at the dark night of the soul, the Easter music will burst forth. For Faust, the appearance of the vision is brief, the length of a dance with a peasant girl, and the draught of one stein beer, but it is promising enough to save him. It is not uncommon for people to get stuck in this limbo between consciousness, Wanting to end your life is common and easy to slip into despair at the solace of madness. Our culture has lost most of its guidance for this experience. In today's current psychiatric world, it is considered abnormal to not want to live anymore. And although I agree it's not an ideal state to be in, I don't think to say it's abnormal is entirely accurate. As if something is wrong with you or even uncommon. Mental health issues seem to be more prevalent as society is making it more okay to talk about. Socially, it's more encouraged to get help if you need it, but back a few decades, it was much more taboo, and they had other methods of secretly masking the symptoms with, like, excessive medication, like when they gave housewives Valium to have them chill, or, alcohol abuse. I don't think it's abnormal to be so consumed with these intense feelings that you consider the extremes to get some relief. I think many people go through this experience at some point in their life when experiencing this intense pain. We're not supposed to be happy all the time. We have a full range of emotions, and although it would be ideal to be happy most of the time, in the realm of duality which we live in, we can't have happiness without sadness or anger. And as emotional beings, this is our nature. Depression and anxiety can be caused by internal feelings or external circumstances. And external circumstances are something like obvious that's normal to make you sad, like losing your job, death of a loved one, a breakup, or major health issues. Internal circumstances can be harder to understand for yourself and especially others to try and understand and empathize with you. This can especially be confusing if from the outside surface level perspective you have financial stability, you have a good job, your health, your family, or even a supportive relationship, and you're still experiencing these feelings of sadness or anxiety. This can be a message that there is something that needs to be explored more deeply within yourself. Some sort of unaddressed trauma, but also perhaps a calling regarding your soul's direction in which you need to move towards. This can also be more of a personality thing where someone is naturally more pessimistic and melancholic, and although it can be less than ideal, it may just be facets of their personality and not something to fix, but to accept and learn how to navigate. I've noticed in astrology, this can manifest more if you have prominent Saturn energy in your birth chart, such as having Capricorn or Aquarius placements, or if you have Saturn aspecting significant points in your natal chart, like having it aspecting your sun or your moon, or one of your angles, which are ascendant, descendant, midheaven, or IC. I don't know what the IC stands for, which is at the bottom. Those are like the east, west, north, south points of the chart. This can also relate to the term Satyrian, which means slow, gloomy, moody, or mysterious. So, that's that. Be gloomy. Just might be a little gloomy. So, considering the stories we have discussed, it's clear that when on a spiritual path in evolving consciousness, one is to be met with extreme darkness, shadow, and despair. Most are not going to take it very well and at least consider taking their own life. I don't think it's abnormal to want to leave this place when you're so full of despair, and it's not something a lot of people want to talk about. To discuss it as something that is abnormal is once again suppressing the shadow. It is now attaching shame to this feeling of despair. People who see mental health professionals have learned not to be too honest about those feelings at risk of being locked up. Which, is kind of a good rule, but a lot of people do lie to their doctor about their actual mental well-being. So I wonder if another pivot is necessary in mental health teachings to be able to acknowledge these feelings without getting locked up for, fear of causing harm to yourself or others. But that's a very sticky situation. Some people do not understand the intense desire to self-destruct, but I think for a lot of people, it circles their thoughts, and it feels almost comforting to have this idea, to have this way out of suffering. For some people, it's just this idea, but for some, they are more serious about it. What is clear to me in that this evolution of consciousness going on, this will probably be more prevalent to overcome these shadows brought to the surface. It's very common to hear stories of people who have tried to unalive themselves, but it didn't work out, whether they survived or something stopped it, and they're now glad it worked out because they now have things in their life they're grateful for. Like they jumped off a bridge or something, and in the process of falling, they had this moment of like, what am I doing? You know, that kind of thing. Most people have to go through these dark times to get through a better place at some point in their life. Perhaps not always to the extreme where they feel like they need to leave, but it is common in the human experience to have to go through these dark times. This is also related to the tarot card called the Wheel of Fortune. The wheel is always turning, and so if you're having bad times right now, it's not going to be bad forever, and if you're having good times right now, just know something's going to come back around and might be challenging, and that is the nature of fate. Continuing with the story, Faust is refreshed from his experience of dancing with the cute girl, having his beer, but his assistant has him go back to work in the same environment that led him to the despair. However, when he returns to his office, there is now this black poodle that is attached to him. This is a physical manifestation of his shadow that is appearing in the story now. The shadow consists of those aspects of your character that belong to you but have not been given any conscious place in your life. Assimilating one's shadow is the art of catching up to those facets of your life that have not been lived out adequately, the parts of your life that are missing. If you are an intellectual person, your shadow may consist of embracing your youthful immaturity your life has lacked, turning into a man of action. This is Faust's new mission. You know, his whole life he's been a little nerdy, and now he has to be a man of action. If you're an earthy person and not so intellectual, then your shadow may consist of that realm that Faust had to leave. You must give attention to your intellectual side. This can be a person attached to the physical reality of things, but not so much of the mental plane. Perhaps someone who has spent their days partying and having fun, they must now venture to give attention to intellectual things. This can be a difficult transition if the entirety of their life has been built around this structure. You may end up losing friends who still want to be stuck in that lifestyle. But if you choose to remain in those cycles, then you further your depression. You keep engaging in substances to numb the pain as you grow deeper into despair, not addressing the shadow, not wanting to change. There is a part of you that longs for this change, but attachment to these cycles and physical dependencies will keep you locked in as long as you keep doing that. This is why ultimately it's important to maintain balance in one's life. Not too much working, not too much playing. If you work too much, you can lose inspiration. If you play too much, you lose meaning. Epiphanies cannot always be summoned when focusing on them. They come when you're doing other things, when you're having fun, spending time with friends and family. If you directly seek answers, you may be left unresponded to. It is sometimes better to let the brain work it out in the subconscious first. Sometimes epiphanies come at the spur of the moment and not when consciously working through the material. This goes for normal work or spiritual work or inner work. Masculine energy especially does better, sometimes focusing on other things and then suddenly awakening with new realizations. Versus like feminine energy sometimes does better consciously working through material. When the shadow becomes integrated, you're often met with a new influx of energy. This is the return of the vitality that was missing in Hamlet. It has been missing in Faust's life, as he's been a man of word and not to act. He's too passive to go after things, comfortable in his stagnancy, and it was too much to take anymore until he realized what was missing. Humanity's original wholeness must be restored and reinstated. We cannot go back to the earlier versions of consciousness. The attempt to go back to the good old days is a common political theme in American culture. It marks the desire to avoid the difficult times ahead. And of course, it's always a lie. Faust makes an agreement with his shadow, Mephistopheles, that if he can experience his unlived life of his youth, but not become attached to it, then he is free. His unlived life has to be caught up, restored, recovered, and experienced without doing basic damage to one's inner life. Life must flow, and you must accept that endings will come and go. There can be sadness, but to dwell on what was lost will keep you in third-dimensional consciousness. These pair of opposites are supposed to temper each other and not triumph, so the ego and the shadow must be redeemed together. They are meant to balance each other out. Faust is weak, shy, and frightened, while Mephistopheles is ruthless, bold, and without morality and ethics. By the end of the play, Faust becomes strong, and Mephistopheles has learned to love. How cute. So, Faust begins to travel and live as an irresponsible youth, as he never has. He's becoming a man of action. This represents the hungering of a middle-aged man for the youth that he missed. But it's not actually fun. It's a miserable time indeed, once again full of depression and misery. The lesson here is that there's no literal solution to unlived life. By going through this experience, we become more aware of our condition. It is a necessary part of the process. It requires an inner solution and not an outer solution. We can find an alternative interior environment for experiencing and integrating our lost youth in the realm of symbol, ceremony, art, and imagination. These languages exist apart from time and space. New worthy channels include poetry, music, art, new perspectives, a blossoming philosophical inquiry, a new religious understanding, and something of this world that captures you. Less worthy channels to focus on include fanaticism, dictatorial religious beliefs, and ego inflations of all kinds. If that happens, you will be sent back to Hamlet's condition of suffering. Inner work on oneself requires the ego to take a back seat. Still be present, as much insight into our blockages and triggers is needed to be healed. This takes place in extreme introversion and solitary. We must turn within carefully. Done recklessly could cause a psychological breakdown. This process can be summed up by saying it is the relocating of the center of the personality from the ego to the center greater than oneself. Which is, your true self, your soul, essentially. In this work, every part of the psyche has a place to sit and feel acknowledged, including the dark elements buried in the subconscious that we try hard to push away. The ego controls the rate at which you're able to be honest about yourself. If you cannot be honest with yourself about your insecurities and shortcomings, your ego controls you. Without the ego, the darkness, the shadow, the pure primal energy would be untamed, and you have no control of what it could do. So they're both important for this reality we live in. This is the part of true inner discovery. When you know yourself, you're less likely to get defensive when someone questions those insecurities of yours. You can be honest with yourself. Even if you do get defensive inside when someone tries you, you can control your outward reaction and not bite the head off the other person. Sometimes people provoke these insecurities on purpose to try and get a rise out of you, but by maintaining composure, it does not give them the power they seek. They did not succeed in taking away your happiness. It then makes them have to face their own shadow that they were trying to avoid by attacking you and trying bringing you down. Sometimes the shadow is triggered by accident, and that is an experience to learn more about yourself. And it's important in these situations not to bite the head off of someone who actually cares about you if they triggered you by accident. Relationships of all kinds are mirrors, and some people don't like what they see in the reflection and they run away, or they get confused and deluded. They blame the other person for making them feel bad about themselves. This is when the pain is still in the subconscious. They don't realize that they're the ones feeling insecure. They project all of their hurt feelings onto the other person while they are doing their best to try and avoid facing reality. This behavior can include drowning in substances, running away from confrontation and accountability, and becoming a monster to the people around them. This is to try and avoid the pain of evolving, which involves facing the shadow. They are trying to stay in that simple consciousness, but they cannot go back. You can never go back. Sometimes during the process of trying to evolve to enlightened consciousness, men will adopt this self-centered approach where they attempt to dominate the world around them for spiritual purposes. It is still operating from the ego, but now they have shifted their attention to helping others for their own personal agendas or stroking their own ego. These people can act like they're very wise and someone to follow, but it's not really authentic as they haven't actually integrated their shadows. There are a lot of people now that get into spiritual influencing and stuff, or leading other people without having done this process. And these people are kind of faking their enlightenment to their followers and sometimes even themselves. These will be people that self-proclaim themselves to be prophets or gurus, or even referring to themselves as a god. I think a lot of cult leaders can be in that type of vibe too. It's important during this process to try and keep in mind your humanity and to not try and become an archetypal figure, as this can lead to psychological explosion. So, you can't be God, you can't be an archetypal figure, you're not meant to be that. So people that, proclaim that, they're not, they're just Delulu. So in the last step of evolving consciousness, we have redemption. Faust and Mephistopheles draw closer and closer to the needed temperance. There is actually a lot to the ending of the story, because this story was actually 2 parts that he published separately, years apart. So there's a lot that kind of happens in the end of the story, but I can't cover all that because this video would be ridiculously long. So just know that they balanced each other out. They found redemption, and love was the catalyst needed to complete this union of opposites. They were able to touch eternity, to touch love, and to be delivered from the time-space 3D world we live in, or as we mentioned earlier, the illusion of reality. This is ascension from this plane to a higher level of consciousness. The 4th dimensional consciousness is the realization that we all are one and that everything is love. So the last lines of Faust, I will read them to you. All that is perishable is but an image. Here the short-reaching becomes result. The indescribable, here it is done. The eternal feminine draws on us. This is more of a hint that wholeness is not attained by means of masculine law or contract or domination. It is a gift from the eternal feminine aspect of God. Once again, highlighting the importance of higher consciousness is the balancing and combining elements of the masculine and feminine aspects within each individual and the whole collective. There's to not be a war between the energies, but an understanding and appreciation for each role it plays in the world. This is partly the goal of a twin flame relationship. There is a need to balance the masculine and feminine energies within the connection, which becomes the blueprint for the rest of the planet. Enlightenment is not some constant, perfect consciousness. It is the ability to tap into that psychological space when needed. And you can bounce around these levels of consciousness. For example, enlightenment can be accessed for a moment where you reach clarity about a situation, but if you forget and go back to old patterns, you might forget those realizations. You're not actually implementing the wisdom. So you might go and tap in and be like, yes, I got it. And then you're like, oh, whoops, forgot, So it's important to consciously create space to connect with that higher part of yourself, to remind you the importance of every step, lesson, challenge, and blessing. Taking the time to connect with your higher self, your inner higher consciousness, whatever is important for that. So if you took the time every day, every morning to connect with higher consciousness, and then, throughout the day, the more you do it, you remember the wisdom, and it helps you stay in more of a constant flow of that state of consciousness. Typically through meditation is a good way to do this, but that's not the only way to do that. I personally have a connection with writing, and so I can channel wisdom through writing things out or typing things out. So a lot of times if I have a question or something, I can put on music and things just flow, and then I'll look at it later and I'm like, oh, who's she? She's so wise. Oh my God, that was me. When you begin to evolve to a fourth dimensional consciousness, you feel lighter and can be happier more easily. The troubles that used to consume you aren't as bad anymore. There is this acceptance for a lot of things that maybe used to bother you and for this reality that you're in. It takes practice to make it more consistent. That's not to say you will not have moments of sadness and anger. It's normal to experience these feelings, but it'll be easier to maintain more of an equilibrium even if the people around you are upset and causing you bad vibes. You don't get bothered as much by people who are in their own nonsense. You just let people have their own journey and be upset and whatever. People have their own battles to fight inside, and there's no reason to have them drag you down with them, although they might try. So, in the Garden of Eden story with Adam and Eve, they were an example of in simple consciousness. They were happy and unaware, and then they ate that fruit, and they were thrusted into third dimensional consciousness. And now to get back to Eden or heaven, we have to evolve to the fourth dimensional consciousness or enlightenment. And the snake is the one that convinced them to eat the fruit. The snake was Lilith, if you know about Lilith, or possessed by Samuel, depending on what story, because I feel like there's a lot of different stories on what happened with that. But the snake or Lilith represents the darkness or the shadow, and Lilith being a goddess, angel that embraces the characteristics of the dark feminine energy. She represents the shadows that need to be acknowledged and healed within each individual on the planet. This darkness and shadow weighs us down energetically, and as you release this, you will feel lighter, and so will humanity. This is the same concept as when you're sad, you feel heavier physically. Unhealed trauma and insecurity weighs you down. If you ignore it, it's still there. If you heal it, you'll feel lighter. Johnson mentions in his book that the ability to perceive the color blue is a recent acquisition for the human race. It probably developed fewer than 2,000 years ago. Similarity, harmonic music appears only in 15th and 16th centuries. Does this correspond to the evolution of consciousness? Is this a new evolution of perception within humanity? What other new senses can we develop? Telepathy seems to be a symptom of raising the consciousness of the planet. As you dissolve the shadow between individuals and the collective, the desire for hiding the truth, lying, and acting from inauthenticity will not be as common, as everyone can read each other's conscious thoughts and feelings anyway. Some people experience this type of connection with someone they are close to or know very well, have a spiritual connection with. Twins have it too, notably sometimes. This will generally expand as more of the planet also raises its consciousness. The dark night of the soul is a transformational process in which a part of you is dying. The part of you that you thought was real was a facade, and it's dying in order to be reborn. The character that you were playing was who everyone else wanted you to be. When this period comes up for you, it's time to embrace who you really are. But that death can be painful, as it's supposed to be. With that pain is where the transformation happens. As we grow up, we can adopt certain behaviors and patterns from our friends, families, romantic partners, or societal expectations that aren't actually aligned with who we are on a soul level. As we shed this facade, the real you can emerge. In this process, you have to leave behind the people, jobs, and behaviors that are no longer aligned with your soul. Resisting this process can create stagnancy and keep you stuck in negative patterns that hinder your growth. The timing of the dark night of the soul seems more faded. Some people are not prompted with this period until later in life, or not even at all in this lifetime. It's usually triggered by a breakup, a near-death experience, loss of a job or home, illness, or any life-changing event to cause a tower moment. In tarot, this is represented by the Tower card, which speaks of major sudden changes to inflict transformation and higher learning. This is part of the process needed to expand consciousness. I started experiencing more significant depression around when I was 23. I'm 26 now, which has a correlation in astrology called the 12th house perfection year, and it can generally be a tough age for many people. It coincides with the phrase, like, no one likes you when you're 23. At that time in my life, I was very sad, lethargic, and anxious, and I had a hard time doing basic tasks or like leaving the house. I tried, like most people, to cope with various substances, and it helped me not feel despair all of the time, but it ultimately made me feel worse when I would be sober again. I eventually started taking antidepressants, and they did help me function a bit better and get to a better place at that point. But I also felt like I was not dealing with the root issues and that I was numbing my pain. If you've taken antidepressants, you know that sometimes they kind of like flatten you out. It's like it stabilizes you, but it's like it kind of makes you more like blah. And that's kind of what I was dealing with. Like, I wasn't as majorly sad, but I also was just not really that happy either. After being on them for a year, I came to a point where I wanted to deal with my sadness without them, which initially was the design of antidepressants. They were kind of normally supposed to be like a short-term thing, but some people need them for more long-term. And when I got off of them, it was really hard and I was pretty depressed again. But eventually I got better into a place where I could be okay without them. I realized it's okay to be sad, and the goal of life shouldn't be trying to avoid these dark feelings. The sadness I was experiencing mostly wasn't about specific things in my life. It was like this feeling of sadness that just lingered around me. This made me feel like I had a certain amount of sadness to like feel, essentially. And if I kept fighting it, then it would linger even longer and keep taking longer. I think it took about a year off the antidepressants before I started to feel more balanced. But at that time, I was also using substances to try and cope with it. And after I cut out the substances completely, it was about 4 months until I started to feel better. What I noticed for me is that when you use the substances, they tend to, well, I've always been really sensitive to them. And so like they would make me feel better, but then when I was sober again, they would make me feel even worse. And it like created this instability in my moods. And now I would say, you know, I do get sad still sometimes, but it's easier to manage and it's not as extreme. I think the substances sometimes can make it worse like that and make the varying different levels more intense. It was difficult at first, especially in social situations, but I had this feeling that if I kept being sober, then I would eventually get used to it. And I was correct, actually. And now I feel a lot better that I'm able to be fully present in who I am and not worry about driving home messed up, or if I drank too much, or, you know, did I say something stupid? As I've gotten older, I have definitely gotten more sensitive to substances, and my intolerance for them grew more extreme. And so it really came to a point like back when I used to I've been drinking alcohol in a long time now, probably like over a year and a half or whatever. And like I used to get hungover for like 2 solid days. Like you can't even lay in bed and scroll on phone because you just feel like crap. You have a headache. And I'm like, I can't do this anymore. Like I have things to do. So it was just too much. And I think that made it a little easier to quit, because some people, like, they never get hangovers, they don't have bad effects like that. And it's like, well, why stop? There's nothing really bad going on that you can notice. So I don't really miss it at all. It stopped making me feel good, even, not only like afterwards, but it just gave me anxiety. And I think what happened is, like, as I heal and like get better within myself, the substance actually start to bring you lower and they start to make you feel worse. Part of the reason too I also stopped with all that was because I needed more clarity in my life. And I feel like when you use those substances, they kind of can take that away from you. And so I needed that clarity in order to understand more of the direction I wanted to go in life. Because there was a lot of uncertainty, especially when you're going through these heavy emotions. It can be very hard to navigate. And so I needed that clarity to understand myself and to where I wanted to go from there. The hard part was just breaking out of the patterns you're stuck in. You can consciously be aware that you need to make changes, but if you keep doing the same things every day, that's being stuck in those same cycles. During that time, I was kind of scared of losing everything in my life that I had come to know and accept as my normal. I was worried that things I were attached to were going to be taken from me and that my whole life was going to be turned upside down, because sometimes that can happen in, those types of tower moments. And in a way, that did happen. Not everything left my life, but a lot of things needed to transform, including my own personal perspective on things. To transform means to die first. But during that time, I feared that all I've ever known would be lost forever. And it's this feeling of trying to navigate through the darkness without knowing where it was going. And that can be very scary when you don't really understand what's going on. But I did need that isolation to really tap into the core of who I was and understand the process that was taking place. At that time, it was very difficult for me to talk to people in general, let alone try to explain what I was feeling. Like even, keeping up with my friends, like it was really hard for me to text people back. Like it was just really a time where I just had no energy to do anything. Where I had no energy to put much attention towards other people because I was so consumed with these intense feelings. So when you try to avoid your feelings with distractions, substances, other people, you're avoiding yourself, and thus you're losing your essence and what makes you who you are. And that's why it's important to keep doing things that perpetuate who you are and things that you enjoy, that make you happy and speaks to you. Whether that's something that's creative or a hobby, reading about things you enjoy, learning about new things. If all you're doing is scrolling on phone and talking and hanging out with other people, you can lose what makes you who you are. That's why it's important to spend time alone and reinforce the connection you have with yourself that makes you who you are. If you accept the sad feelings, feel them and let them go, it will ease up. But it could take some time depending on deeply these things are affecting you, whatever you're dealing with. And there is a difference between feeling it and letting it go versus suppressing, detaching, and avoiding it. Past life karmic lessons and karmic people tend to be the most painful and hardest to let go of, as those patterns have been repeated through lifetimes and it's really become part of your psyche, those karmic patterns. They're not really a part of your psyche. It's all just like a perception thing. It's an illusion. That's illusions again. So it's not really a part of you, but you like feel like it is. It's just hard to separate. It's also important to recognize if you keep replaying the same events in your mind again and again. Hyperfixating and obsessing on what you've been through can also keep you stuck. Part of evolving consciousness is gaining more control over your thoughts and thought patterns and not letting them control you. I'm someone who does tend to obsessively think about things, which isn't always a bad thing. If you hyperfixate on things, it can lead to a greater understanding of something. But the dark side is that this obsessive nature can keep you stuck and ruminating if it's about traumatic things that happened to you. But sometimes there are people who have to obsess over things to get it out of their system. You have to obsessively think about it to exhaustion, and then you're like, all right, I've done everything. I've looked at it from every angle. That's it. Good. So in our world, there is an over-attachment to the physical realm and physical pleasures like money, acquiring stuff, getting a big house, nice car. And that's not to say desiring nice things in the physical world is bad, but without a connection to the heart, the soul, and the spirit, it can lead to greed and hoarding money, exploiting others for profit, and living a very superficial life. The consequences of this include a small percentage of the world having most of the wealth, while more and more others are at the bottom fighting to survive. Sometimes people just focus on making money and not working on themselves in that process, and then when they have financial stability, they feel empty because money is not everything in life. You have an outer abundance but no inner meeting, and that feels empty. And that's why sometimes people who appear to have it all in life or financial security will end up taking their own life. The Western culture has been very disconnected spiritually generally for a while. Money corrupts a lot of people in families, religions, and politics, and the government especially. There is a lot of corruption in the government and too many people who don't actually care about helping people. A lot of people in the government are only concerned with making laws for their own agenda, or they're just involved for the clout. The person that gets elected is the one that has the most money for a big tour. The two-party system also reinforces this control and division over the population to keep the power with them. A majority of people in the government don't care about actually helping the people. And the people who truly do care, it's hard for them to get things accomplished as the people with the money and power want it to stay that way. I also feel that some religions have a foundation in morality, but through translations and mistranslations of original spiritual texts, oftentimes the initial meaning is lost. And then people will use certain religions to further their own agendas of manipulation and power. And I think that is a large problem in religions of today. The US government wasn't designed for a population this large, and I think we're witnessing the cracks of this showing, given all of the major social issues that still exist in the country that don't really seem to be improving and just keep getting worse as the population keeps getting bigger. The United States is currently going through its Pluto return, which is when Pluto returns to the same position it was when it was established in 1776. This historically represents a very pivotal point in a country's evolution where the way of doing things must transform or the country will fall. This is not just a pattern that's apparent in astrology, but has been seen by studying empires of the past, and it's called the 250-year cycle. This Pluto return is happening in the sign of Capricorn in the United States' second house. Both of these can be associated with the financial systems, with things relating to the national wealth, inflation, trade, banking, currency, and taxation. I think we can really feel the effects of this considering the major increase of cost in living in recent years. There has been an awakening going on right now collectively as more and more people are raising their consciousness on the planet. There's always been a slower evolution taking place, but it's much more intense right now due to the technological age that we are in right now, where information is widely accessible at our fingertips, and we're more connected than we have been ever before. This process of expanding consciousness includes dealing with all these negative feelings and having a dark night of the soul. These awakenings come in waves for the collective of people. Not everyone will be experiencing it at the same time. Imagine that. We will be cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Some people won't even have it in this lifetime. You know, some people are really at the level where they are just meant in this lifetime to focus on their physical goals, and you know, it's not really on their mind to expand consciousness. And so a lot of people are just going to be living in their three-dimensional life, just doing their thing. This is about recognizing the things in your life that are no longer serving you and that are out of alignment. Recognizing that the current structure for the world we live in is full of corruption and no longer sustainable energetically for where we are evolving to. Nor are the current circumstances set up for a society to thrive and be happy. This influx of increased consciousness brings new ideas, new ways of life. Outdated versions no longer work, and we are forced to evolve. We will continue to see past old systems failing and changes continue, birthing a new paradigm. Doesn't that sound exciting? And that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I dropped my mouse. Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.